Hi again, everyone. Welcome officially. Good evening or good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is you're tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today. I'm Hayla Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am so pleased to welcome you to today's live author reading of contemporary fiction. We'll be hearing from Stephanie Claypool reading from A Thousand Tiny Stitches, a novel, released on November 12th. Leslie Abner reading from Renovation, a novel, also released on November 12th. And Amy Cole reading from In Every Lifetime, released today, November 19th. All three authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, they can be found on Atmosphere Press's website as well. That's at atmospherepress.com/books. And I'm actually going to put the links to each book in the chat for everybody here so you can easily access those. At the end of today's event, we are going to have time for audience questions. So during the event, if you have a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type those in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. Please do stay muted for the duration of the event, but feel free to use the chat for praise and comments in addition to questions. And one last note is that we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. So if you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Stephanie, Leslie, and Amy today. We're going to start off with our first reader, who is Stephanie Claypool. Stephanie, a native of Metro New York, weaves her diverse life experiences into heartfelt and captivating novels. From London to San Diego and Annapolis, her journey eventually led her to call Pittsburgh home, where she lives with her retired Navy husband, her father, and a menagerie of beloved pets. Beyond her writing desk, Stephanie is an enthusiast of cooking and wine, fountain pens and notebooks, and fabrics and threads. Her greatest joys are the simple things in life. Today, we'll be hearing her read from A Thousand Tiny Stitches, in which, after a hit and run driver tragically kills Lily's daughter and son-in-law, she is left with unspeakable grief, custody of her 8-year-old granddaughter Emma, and an impossible wish to fulfill her daughter's dream of opening a quilt shop in their small Western Pennsylvania town. But not everyone in town is rooting for Lily's success, and the line between helper and hinderer isn't always clear, forcing Lily to make sacrifices she never imagined. Now let's welcome Stephanie.
Thank you, Hayla. I'm just going to start at the beginning because it's the best place to start. For Daniel Grayson, in life and death, I love you forever. Chapter 1, Snip. Lily Wolfe hesitated at the bedroom door, watching her granddaughter Emma murmur to her doll. Seeing her playing after 2 weeks spent glued to Lily's side was a relief. We can go shopping today, Lily said. Pick out a new comforter? The bed was covered in one of the first quilts Lily had ever made, but its somber pattern in indigo and garnet wasn't right for an 8-year-old. She didn't have any quilts suitable for Emma that were big enough for a queen-size bed. Someday they could make one together, but in the meantime, Emma needed to feel the room was hers, not a guest room anymore. Engrossed in her imaginary conversation, head bowed, a sweep of fine brown hair obscuring her face, Emma hadn't seemed to hear. It should be okay to leave her alone for a while. Lily slipped away to the living room, hoping to find a slender crescent of how life used to be. Her cell phone had stopped its constant buzzing. No friends or neighbors were there bringing food or expressing condolences for the inconsolable. Even in the quiet, Lily knew life could never be the same, but maybe, if she sat to quilt, she could forget for a while. Settling into her favorite chair in the corner by the front window, she draped her work in progress over her lap and unspooled a practiced length of thread. The rhythmic rocking of her needle quieted the despondent voices in her head. Only the ticking of the wall clock marked the passing minutes. At the end of the run, she twisted a knot, fed it between the layers, and trimmed the tail. The tinny snip of her scissors made her pause. When had she last heard Emma? Barefoot, she padded back down the carpeted hall. The bed was made, the doll lay naked on the floor, a few outfits scattered about. Everything else was in its place, except Emma. The calm Lily had felt only moments before shattered. She forced a breath into her rigid lungs. Emma? Her ears strained against the silence. Think, Emma had to be somewhere. Maybe her mother's old bedroom. Panic rising, Lily bolted to her daughter Amanda's room. It took a few seconds to process the scene before her. Closet doors wide open, Amanda's suitcase upside down. Sleeves and pant legs severed from their garments were strewn over the desk and bed. Fabric strips shorn from Amanda's dresses and blouses covered the carpet in a rainbow of colors. In the center of the floor lay Lily's 10-inch fabric shears, the blades splayed and glinting. Her eyes darted to each shred of red, expecting blood. Emma, please, tell me where you are. A muffled sob, barely audible over the rush in Lily's ears, rose from under the bed. She dropped to her knees and lifted the dust ruffle. Emma was curled in a ball against the wall, her face buried in a bunched up piece of her mother's fuzzy bathrobe. Are you hurt? Emma shook her head. You scared me. Lily pressed her hand to her thudding heart, wishing she'd said something different. But what could anyone say? Lily had lost Amanda, her only child, but Emma had lost both her parents. Can you come out? No. Emma's answer came between jagged breaths as she fought not to cry. How about I come to you? Oh, okay. The space under the box spring was generous for Emma's small body. Lily, although only 5'2", had to lie on her back like a car mechanic and squirm. Halfway under, her ponytail stuck on the carpet, yanking her scalp. She had had an appointment to cut her hair shorter, but then the accident happened. She'd never gone. With her one free arm, she reached over her shoulder and pulled her hair to the front, the gray a taunting reminder that nothing stayed the same. As she inched the width of the mattress towards Emma, the air closed around her, claustrophobic, stale, and smelling of dust. She closed her eyes until she pulled Emma into the crook of her arm and kissed her forehead. Emma buried her face against Lily's breast and wailed, long, plaintive notes, punctuated only to catch her breath. What had made Lily think she could quilt for a while? She'd wanted to believe Emma was happily playing alone in her room. Something truly terrible could have happened. No quilt, no moment of peace, nothing Lily wanted or needed was more important than Emma. After a few minutes, Emma's sobs subsided. Are you ready to tell me what happened? Lily stroked Emma's cheek with the back of her fingers. I want to make a quilt for Mommy's shop. Make a quilt from her clothes? That's a lovely idea. Lily didn't have the heart to say Amanda's dream of opening a quilt shop, and the dilapidated old house she'd bought had died with her. As much as Lily had looked forward to helping Amanda, she had no idea how to do it alone. But it's ruined. It's all ruined. I ruined everything. Emma shuddered, then stiffened. Shh. Lily pulled her as tight as she could in the confined space, as if she could absorb Emma's rage and pain. Nothing is ruined, but I wrecked her clothes. Nonsense. Quilts are made from scraps, all sewn together to make something beautiful. Her words offered little solace. A few weeks earlier, Amanda and Matt had left Pittsburgh and temporarily moved in with Lily so Emma could start the year at her new school. They'd been looking to buy a house nearby, but hadn't found the right one. Now they never would. At that thought, Lily's anger flared like a tongue of dragon fire, searing her throat, locking her jaw. Nothing in her life had prepared her to handle the rage threatening to explode inside her. Yet she had to stifle it to be strong for Emma. How about if we get out from under here and I find a box to save the scraps? Lily felt Emma nod and began the reverse squirm to freedom, grateful she kept a routine of daily exercises. Some of her friends at 65 had trouble getting up from the floor. I'll get the box. You come out when you're ready. Lily raced to the basement. Somewhere among her fabric storage boxes, she had an empty one. But the basement was stuffed with Amanda and Matt's furniture and moving boxes. Lily dumped the first plastic tub she saw. Wrapping paper tumbled out. She left it and took the steps 2 at a time back to Emma. Please come out. You can help me do this. Lily picked up an ivory silk sleeve from Amanda's favorite blouse and rubbed it against her cheek, dropping it into the box when Emma poked her head out from under the bed. Together, they had it all picked up in a few minutes. The lid snapped shut, and Lily shoved the box into the bottom of the closet. She'd deal with the mess in there another time. There's one thing I have to tell you. Lily held her scissors by the blades, the silver handles pointing at Emma. Never take these scissors again, or any of my cutting tools without permission, or use them without supervision. Do you understand? Yes. Emma's lip trembled. The last thing Lily wanted was to make her cry again, but this was too important. Scraps of fabric are not a problem, but you could have seriously hurt yourself, and that is never okay. Where was the handbook on how to discipline a heartsick child? Intuition and love were all Lily had. She'd never felt so inadequate. The next morning, Lily laid half a bagel for Emma and 2 cups of hot chocolate on the kitchen table to have breakfast before the first day of school. Would you like to float the marshmallows on the top? Lily nudged the bag of mini marshmallows toward Emma. How many do you want, Gammy? I think 5. Emma suspended a handful above the cup, dropping them one at a time, then counted 9 into her own cup. It was good to get a glimpse of Emma the way she used to be. Are you excited to go to school? Amanda had already registered Emma. After the accident, Lily briefed the school about Emma's circumstances. The principal had promised to do everything they could to ease her transition. I guess. Emma laid her hands on her lap and pressed into the back of her chair. The innocent smile she'd worn melted into non-existence like the marshmallows in her cup. You don't want to hang around here with only your grandma, do you? Of course she did. She still woke in the middle of the night and climbed into the empty side of Lily's bed, a comfort to both of them. Emma pried herself one leg at a time from the kitchen chair. A few bagel crumbs stuck to her chin. Lily wiped them with her thumb and looked into Emma's eyes, hoping to find another spark of the girl who would have popped out of her seat in a hurry to get to school, the one who briefly appeared when counting marshmallows. Nothing. She needed more time to heal. Even then, a deep and ugly scar would remain. Let's walk to the bus stop. If Lily acted excited, kept her tone upbeat, some might rub off on Emma. Although still August, a thin cloud cover kept the sun from warming the overnight chill. No need for a jacket, but they could make the short walk without breaking a sweat. Hand in hand, they passed identical 3-bed houses like Lily's, built in the 50s, red brick with low eaves. At the end of the street, they met the state road. Across the way, the newly opened Village in the Hollows, a retirement community with a multi-story assisted care facility clad in white siding and green shutters, butted up to a wooded hillside leading to Fellows Run Road. Lily couldn't see the tree that had crushed Amanda and Matt from where she stood on the sidewalk, but felt it hovering at the crest. She wanted to scramble up the hill, let the thorns on the brambles tear at her skin, to claw at the gash at its bark where Amanda had drawn her last breath until the pain from her wounds numbed the pain in her heart. She wanted to let out the grief and anger that threatened to overwhelm her and cry until she turned to dust. And she wanted the police to find the soulless driver, heedless of the double yellow line, who had run them off the road, then fled. But that wasn't likely. Paint and shards weren't enough evidence, and there were no surveillance cameras in the small town of Fellows Hollow, nor on the back roads of western Pennsylvania. Lily straightened her spine and pressed on. The bus stop was on Fellows Run Road, the main street through town, in front of a set of 4 old row houses next to the house Amanda had planned to convert into a quilt shop. As they approached, Emma pulled Lily to a halt and faced the would-be shop. Her eyes were unfocused, and her lips curved in the hint of a wistful smile, so like her mother's, looking as if she took the 2 steps up the wide porch and peered through a window, she'd see Amanda inside, and all would be right again. I want to go to Mommy's shop. Not today, you have to go to school. Why can't I stay home with you? Normally, Emma's eyes would have been sparkling with excitement. Instead, the only thing sparkling were her tears. Because you belong in school, you loved your old school, and you'll love this one too. Surely school would distract Emma, give her space to think of other things. Come on, let's wait at the curb. The bus rattled to a stop, and the folding door creaked on its hinges. The driver, a woman about Lily's age, smiled. Going to Fellows Hollow Elementary? She is. Lily stooped, hugged Emma, and rotated her shoulders until she faced the bus. It's her first day there. Welcome aboard. The doors closed behind Emma. She slid into the first seat and pressed her hand against the window, staring at the shop. Were there no limits to how broken a heart could get? Lily took a deep breath, hoping to fill the hollowness in her chest, but only sucked in petroleum-scented bus exhaust. At some point, she'd have to tell Emma the sad truth. The shop would need to be sold. But that time had not yet come. It could wait, like the scraps in the box, the wrapping paper on the basement floor, her haircut, and many other things. That's the end of chapter 1.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and for giving us that kind of exposition and really introducing us to the characters like that. I think that was a fantastic way to orient us with the story. Reading next today is Leslie Abner. Leslie graduated from Cornell University and pursued a career in interior design at the New York School of Interior Design Graduate School. Leslie founded LA Studio 23 years ago and currently works on both residential and commercial interior design projects. Beyond writing, she fills her time with raising her 3 daughters, enjoying outdoor activities, and traveling. Renovation is Leslie's debut novel. And in Renovation, Skylar, a hopeful designer in New York, faces a pivotal moment when she leaves her toxic job. As she navigates troublesome clients and a hard-drinking boss, her marriage strains under the weight of her ambitions. Caught between her boss's vices and her husband's resentment, Skylar must find a way to balance the life she dreams of with the hardships she has been given. Leslie, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening. Chapter 1. On our first anniversary, my husband reserved a table at an upscale restaurant in Midtown Manhattan where a salad cost $25 and the waiters wore designer suits. We had cut back on takeout for a few months, saving up for the celebratory dinner. Neil had spent days researching and identifying the perfect spot, and he called precisely 30 days in advance to secure a table. He stood a little taller, showing his pride in planning an overpriced dinner, even though we'd had to save up. The restaurant was miles away from his childhood of home-cooked meals with few dinners out. I let Neil take the lead. Truth is, he enjoyed the planning, the decision-making. I appreciated his assertiveness after my childhood filled with too many responsibilities. Besides, my previous boyfriend had thought a romantic evening consisted of a bar stool and a Corona. Just confirming our plan, I'll meet you back home after work. Then we can head over to the restaurant together, Neil said. Yep, I told Francine I had to be out on time tonight. I was very clear. Don't worry, I promised, placing my hands on his narrow shoulders, leaning so close that our noses almost kissed. Neil tucked my hair behind my ear and pecked my forehead before pulling away and pouring his coffee. I didn't find my part-time job as an assistant interior designer demanding, but Francine, my boss, frequently assigned imperative tasks as I began packing up for the day. If they were truly important, I wouldn't have minded, but it was usually something like sharpening pencils or vacuuming the office. It was my first experience working for a designer while I finished design school and a stepping stone to greater things. Despite Neil's judgment, jeopardizing my career over an extra hour of busy work didn't seem constructive. I planned to go home, get ready for dinner, and surprise Neil with the sexy lingerie I'd squirreled away from a shop Neil Francine's office. I bought the hottest black negligee I could find during their sale after Valentine's Day and saved it for our 1-year anniversary. As I should have expected, Francine insisted I refold an entire closet's worth of fabric samples at exactly 5:45. I overtly checked my watch, hoping she would notice. This whole closet needs work, Skylar. Organized by color, then by style, she instructed. I need to leave in 15 minutes, remember? My anniversary dinner, I said sheepishly. Oh, yeah, well, you could stay a little later, right? What time is the reservation, she asked. Oh, I think it's 7:30, but oh, so you're fine. You have plenty of time. Well, I wanted to go home first. It's a nice restaurant. I don't think I can go like this. I glanced down at my jeans covered in lint and strings. You look adorable. Try to get through the whole closet by 7:15 and you won't be late. I wanted to burn every last sample in that closet and dump the ashes on Francine's pristine desk. When I left a voicemail for Neil, I made sure I spoke loud enough, demanding Francine's attention. I would have quit if I didn't need a part-time job while finishing my graduate degree in design. Francine could push me, but quitting symbolized failure, and my parents would not live in disappointment again due to Francine's inconsideration. My parents never let my sister quit her fight to live. Quitting was a certain failure in my family. I could barely pronounce the word rhabdomyosarcoma when my sister had been diagnosed. I had jotted down phonetic notes while eavesdropping on phone calls to gather information. By the time I turned 20, I spoke medical jargon with ease, but it hadn't helped. Chrissy closed her eyes for the last time, and it devastated me. I lost so much of myself when I lost her. There's the Skylar with Chrissy in the world, and the broken version of myself after she disappeared. A sadness hovered over my family after that. But if I established my own design firm, I imagined the softening of my parents' gory lines, relieves that at least one daughter achieved her dreams. Francine didn't lift an eye off her paperwork. I sneered in her direction and quickly looked away. Maybe I would save the lingerie for after dinner. Would Neil even notice or appreciate my efforts? I practiced in my head the conversation I would have with Neil, smoothing over another late night at work. He chided me that my soft-hearted nature never served me well, but my pacifist nature had developed when my sister became ill, courageously ensuring a calm home, even at my own expense. Consoling my parents and jumping at every painful task in my sister's caretaking made me feel useful. Anything easing my parents' anguish was worth the sacrifice. I flew into the restaurant at 7:50. Neil sat at the bar with a stiffened back and a blank look on his face, but I could smell his concealed agitation permeating in the air like an overly perfumed woman in an elevator. I planted a long, passionate kiss on his lips, hoping he would forget my tardiness. I knew he despised sitting alone. Neil's body tensed as I kissed him, and the pang and guilt in my gut lingered. I'm sorry, it's Francine. She's so pushy. The most insensitive woman on the planet, I said. Climbing towards my career goals drove me. Neil felt the same about his career, and he excused his frequent travel, yet never my inconsistent hours. I wanted Francine's approval, and I yearned for more responsibility in her business, but balancing the needs of Neil and Francine was exhausting. For the moment, work was my top priority. Really, Sky? I can't believe you couldn't get out of there earlier. Just get up and leave, Neil said. I pulled air deeply into my lungs, searching for relief from the stress of his disapproval. I wasn't in the mood to argue. Neil didn't appreciate unpredictability, and I had learned how to restore equilibrium when I set him off kilter. I'm sorry, I wanted to, but she insisted, and I didn't want to have a big thing with her. Let's focus on having a great night together. I may even have a surprise for you later. I wrapped my arms around him, smothering any opportunity for argument. Our marriage had taught me tricks for diffusing his temper, and my awareness of Neil's moods often dictated my buoyant attitude in overcompensation. It's so beautiful in here, and the flowers. I've never seen anything like it, I gushed as soon as we were seated at the serene dining room. Yes, nice, Neil said, burying his head in the oversized menu. What are you going to order? Maybe you should order the fish. That would be good for you. It has shallots, your favorite. I smiled. Neil remembered the little things, reminding me how well he knew me. I silently analyzed the space, tilting my head back to observe the ceiling. The cloud-like, all-white interiors of Narcissus made me nervous about ordering red wine. I swear I heard an elongated hush when we entered the vast dining room. Sky? What? Neil asked. No, nothing, I said. Come on, I see those eyes. What's happening in that creative little head of yours? It's just the lighting. I think they're just not using uniform light bulbs in the fixture. It's nothing, it's just me. My eyes scanned rooms with robot-like precision, identifying fine design and overlooked details. Don't be so judgmental, Sky. Not everyone can live up to your design standards. Neil shook his head and changed the subject, going on about the new project his technology firm recently acquired. As the lead programmer and developer on the job, Neil had secured a hearty promotion. While I was proud of his accomplishments, Neil's quick advancement had catapulted him into a frenzy for success. I listened carefully, trying to comprehend the complex programming he developed, and drenched him in accolades, even when the concepts evaded me. I occasionally interjected tidbits of my own day, and Neil praised me like a puppy retrieving a stick for the first time. I heard my mother's voice rewarding me for taking out empty trash cans filled with gauze pads and surgical tape. My heart had warmed when I pleased my mother and I made her daily life easier, and I felt the same tingle of pleasure in taking care of Neil before myself. On our walk home, I reached for Neil's hand and fiddled with his fingers. He stroked my thumb 3 or 4 times before loosening my grip and placing his hands in his pocket. He demonstrated love through romantic dinner reservations and quiet Sunday afternoons reading the paper together. He rarely showed his love for me with gestures, but I knew Neil loved me, and that was enough. After our normal bedtime rituals, we slid into bed from opposite sides, meeting in the middle beneath the sheets. Neil wrapped his arms around me, and his hands wandered beneath my new negligee without noticing the unfamiliar lace. Our routine of expected caresses, kisses, and positions satisfied us both. For a few moments, Neil's body lay close behind me, molding my curves until he turned towards the window, and his heavy breathing escalated and morphed into a snore. I lay in the dark room thinking about how quickly our first year of marriage had passed. Neil had whisked me away from the trauma and turmoil that had stayed with me after my sister died. His insistence on picking the restaurant and every other detail in our lives at times seemed overbearing, but his strength and decision making proved how much he cared for me. Nursing and grieving had consumed my parents, and I often felt invisible and then guilty for having such selfish thoughts. Neil had stepped into my life, doting on me and taking control when decisions were overwhelmed with grief. The days when Chrissy's memory felt like weights in my shoes, Neil had pressed his lips to my forehead and let me loaf on the sofa while he folded the laundry and picked up the groceries. I will always be grateful for his taking care of me.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and for painting that picture of a relationship and almost like these character studies. And it's just a great way to integrate us into that story. So, our final reader for today is Amy Cole. Amy is a voracious romance reader residing with her husband, 2 teenage sons, 2 black labs, and 1 grouchy cat in the Midwest. She's a lover of history, books of all types, food, cooking, traveling, her family, and sports, specifically college football and anything the Kansas State Wildcats are competing in, decorating her house and being outside, primarily in the fall and winter. She loves watching her boys and their friends play football and basketball and run track. She considers her family and friends as the best part of life and works to weave Easter eggs into her stories for each and every one of them. Prior to starting her writing career, Amy traveled extensively for work for many years, and she's tried to include fun tidbits about great locations and can always be counted on to offer advice on where to eat for anyone traveling to a new city. During In Every Lifetime, which is the book we'll hear from today, Violet finds herself inadvertently swept up in a deadly mystery, one she needs help to save herself from. Lucky for her, help arrives in the form of a very capable, tall, dark, and handsome friend of a friend, Max. Max and Violet race to solve this mystery, but with a murderer hot on their heels, they'll have to work together to escape with their lives and maybe find love, passion, and friendship on the way. We'll hear more now from Amy herself.
Thanks, Hayla. Also, it's exciting to get to read with both Leslie and Stephanie because their books are really amazing. So thanks for having me on. And this book's very different, I think. It's a romantic suspense, so it is a little bit spicy and it's very fast paced. So I'm also going to start at the very beginning. As Stephanie said, that's the best place to start. And it is told in third person POV. So this is Violet speaking. If it wasn't for the breeze swirling through the party and the ability to take a deep breath of fresh autumn air, she would have thought she was back in DC and not overlooking the battlefields of Saratoga in upstate New York. This party had all of the markings of the DC scene. Senators glad handing for money, glittering gowns, cigar smoke wafting from smuggled Cuban cigars in the corners, and of course the effervescent champagne. The tight, shimmering evening gown scratching across her sensitive arms was completely out of character for her, But hey, she could dress up if she needed to, complete with a salon-worthy blowout and smoky eye makeup. Truly, she had gone all out, down to the killer heels pinching her feet. It really was a DC type feat to essentially recreate a ballroom overlooking a battlefield. She couldn't deny the effect either. It was a beautiful early fall night, and the battlefield added a layer of romance and mystery that felt like a storybook setting. The flickering torches staked out along the dance floor created on the overlook patio acted as a flame barrier to the darkness beyond. Darkness that she knew held the historical paths of the battle sites and encampments of both American and British soldiers. She loved this place and its history. She stiffened her spine in resolve to continue her new adventure of writing her first novel. After all, she was here for the inspiration for the novel she dreamed of writing. If the words didn't start flowing soon, she'd have to go back to work for the Constitution Now, the newspaper she'd been working at for the last 7 years of her life. She didn't think she could write one more fluff piece on an up-and-coming politician to save her life. She set her crystal glass on a passing waiter's tray and took out her phone. She might as well take a snap for Hazel, or she'd never believe that she'd actually come up here, kitted out as she was. She powered up her phone and opened Snapchat, pressing her thumb to the circle icon and slowly, inconspicuously trying to capture the evening. She added a little color commentary about how the canapes could have used some spice, and then panned the phone back to her own face. I even added a nude lipstick to the smoky eye. Told you I'd do it. She smiled brightly into the camera and tried to send it off to Hazel. And of course, the internet wasn't working well out here. They probably had some type of jammer with a level of DC power in attendance here. Security had been tight when she had climbed the stairs up to the overlook, and she wasn't surprised her snap wasn't going through. She quickly saved the snap, turned her phone back off, and slid her phone into her purse. She'd send it later. In fact, she was ready to leave now anyway. Might as well find her errant blind date and feign tiredness to get back to her hotel in Saratoga Springs. She spied him across the dance floor, chatting with another man at their table. Wasn't that Ambassador Neal? She had to hand it to Brandon, her date for the evening. He certainly knew everyone. Of course, he was the Speaker of the House's son, so that was to be expected. That was actually why she had accepted the blind date set up by her old editor, an entry into this exclusive party she'd never be able to attend on her own. Brandon was connected and handsome. His parents were major donors for the fundraiser this evening. He'd been a complete gentleman, even if a little disengaged. There was also something about him that made her uncomfortable, though, so she was anxious to get back to her hotel, change into those cozy sweats, write notes about the party this evening, and then indulge in yet more The Office reruns. There she is, my stunning date. Brandon tossed his arm across her shoulders as she joined him and Ambassador Neal. Sir, this is Violet Burke, a writer for Constitution Now, and my date for the evening. Violet extended her hand and offered a polite greeting to Ambassador Neal. He was handsome, late 50s, and the third man in his family to be an ambassador. The pleasure is all mine, Violet. What do you think of the fundraiser this evening? Did you know that we are almost at the 247th anniversary of the Battle of Saratoga Springs? He still had held her hand from their introduction. It's beautiful, sir, truly. I did know that. The battle started September 19th, right? She gently pulled back on her hand and replied lightly, not sure if she should demur or be honest in her knowledge. Ah, you found yourself a keeper, Brandon. Well done. Ambassador Neal winked at Brandon. Yes, and it lasted until October 7th. It was a decisive victory for the American troops. In fact, it should come as no surprise to you that my own great-great-great-grandfather was here during the battle. He gave that polished smile again. How wonderful. You must be so proud. She demurred, turning back to her date. I was actually hoping you were perhaps ready to go, Brandon. Please say yes, she pleaded with her eyes, soft smile firmly affixed to her face. She chuckled and self-deprecatingly added, I even took a little video for my sister. She turned back to Ambassador Neal to capture how magical the evening has been, sir. She felt Brandon's soft hand tighten on her shoulder. That was odd. Was that a flash of irritation across his handsome features? Brandon smiled down at her. Sure, Violet, let's head out. He nodded to Ambassador Neal. Neal, a pleasure, as always. Well, Violet, it's nice to meet you. You'll have to come back by our event back in the city next week. Ambassador Neal kissed her hand, clapped Brandon on the shoulder, and waved hello to another guest as he moved to join them. Brandon really was a decent blind date. She just didn't feel any connection. Perhaps that was fine, though. That hadn't been her goal for tonight anyway. He was too polished, too much the typical DC trust fund baby for her to feel comfortable with. She didn't have the sense that she was his type either. Small town aspiring novelist, currently living in DC, cosmopolitan, she was not. They made small talk on the way back to the car, through the buckling in and on the drive back into town. He seemed almost pensive, and she briefly wondered what he and the ambassador had been talking about. She was relieved to see the lights of town coming into focus. They were passing the dark mass of the Springs Park when headlights streaked across the rearview mirror. The car behind them felt super close all of a sudden, and she reached her left hand toward the console to steady herself, right as their car was hit hard from behind. Brandon, she yelled. What was happening? There had been rampant drinking at the party, but they were some miles away from that now and almost back into Saratoga Springs. Hold on, Violet. Brandon seemed both incensed and shocked. His hands were gripping the wheel tighter as the car behind them eased back and swerved into the road. She felt her breathing coming in pants. They were really close to the curve leading into the main street, and the darkness was coming up on them fast. She grabbed her door handle as hard as she could, her muscles tense, her eyes flashing at the rearview mirror as the car behind them sped up again and hit them a second time. Their car was spinning. She heard the crunch before she felt anything. Was she alive? Her body felt numb, and there was screaming in her ears, and then nothing. She risked a glance at Brandon. He was unconscious, head on the wheel, blood trickling down an ugly gash in his head. His breathing was low, but he was alive. She felt his wrist for a pulse, and tried to slow her own racing heart. They needed help. She didn't know what had happened. Had the driver behind them been drinking? Where did he go? Her throat felt hoarse, so she assumed the screams had been her own. Her little clutch, which she thought was just so fun a couple of hours ago, still dangled from her wrist from its little strap. She tried to open it. She knew her phone was in there and she needed to call for help. It took several tries. She couldn't get her fingers to work. She finally got it out and powered it on. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatch trilled through the silent car. Oh, thank God. Finally, she was able to connect. Yes, we've been in an accident and we're by the entrance of the Springs Park. We've been hit. My friend needs help, please. Violet gave as many details as she could to the woman on the other end of the line. She stayed on until she heard the sirens in the distance. Relieved and doing her best to keep a running commentary to try to wake Brandon, she didn't stop rambling until the paramedics pulled the car door back to get her out. She turned off her phone again, knowing she'd need the battery to call Hazel as soon as possible, and not knowing when she'd be back to her hotel to charge it. She could see that Brandon's side of the car had taken the brunt of the accident. Her arm was hurting, but she did an internal check of everything else, and she knew she was okay. She tried to walk back through what happened while the EMT checked her out and people started to gather. Brandon was loaded onto a stretcher, awake now, but dazed. Miss, you're clear. It looks like just the cuts on your arm, but otherwise you were really lucky. This could have been so much worse. The paramedics finished cleaning out the bits of glass from her arm and cleaned the wound up. Your friend wasn't as fortunate as you were. We need to get him to the hospital for more tests, but he is asking for you. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Violet felt like she was watching herself thank the man and walked over to the stretcher Brandon was laid out on. She squeezed his hand as he opened his eyes. Violet, go on. I'm fine. I'll be okay. Really. Just go back to your hotel and I'll call you tomorrow. I'm going to be fine, and I'm sure it's just protocol because I napped a bit back there. Go back to the hotel and get some rest. Only if you're sure, Brandon. I don't want to leave you alone. She really did hate to leave him, even if he was a blind date she'd spent a total of 45 minutes alone with. But geez, she would love to get to those sweats and some sleep. Her adrenaline was crashing and she felt so drained. Yes, he squeezed her hand again. I'll call you, really. He dropped her hand as the EMTs began to load him into the back of the ambulance. She watched until they closed the big doors and turned to the policeman off to her side. Ma'am, if you're ready, I'd like to take a statement tonight, but I promise to get you home quickly. We can follow up tomorrow as long as I get the basics tonight. I'll even drive you back to your home or hotel. He looked young, but earnest and friendly, and really, she felt relieved for the offer. Yes, that sounds good. Okay. Although I don't really know that I can tell you much, I think the driver must have been drinking. They hit us twice, but I think I saw them swerving too. It was a small SUV, dark. Are they here? She turned her head and scanned the scene of onlookers and emergency responder vehicles for a smaller, dark SUV while the cop walked her to his cruiser. He held the front passenger door open for her and replied, "No, ma'am, there were no other vehicles when the first responders arrived. You said a small, dark SUV?" He paused to write that down in his notepad once he got her settled in the seat. "I think so, but I don't see it now either. It must have some damage. Also, I really hope that they didn't hit someone else tonight. I can't believe they didn't stop. But I suppose if they were drinking, they were scared to stop." Insane behavior in her book, but drinking and driving was also not something she'd ever considered. So what did she know? He asked her a few more questions and took down her information before he put the car in drive. He drove her back to the Adelphi, the Grecian hotel on the main street of the old fabled town. He pulled up in front of the hotel, slid the cruiser into park, and hopped out to get her door. He held it open for her as she got out and handed her his card. "Well, that's not the welcome we try to give visitors. And please call me or text me if you think of anything else before we talk tomorrow. Now get some rest and I'll be back around 8:30 in the morning. We can grab coffee in the lobby, my treat, and we'll finish up your statement." "Thanks, officer. I'll see you in the morning." She gratefully shook his hand before turning back into the lobby of her hotel. The lights were low, and she felt like it had been hundreds of years since she dressed up and met Brandon in the lobby. She gambled that her battery would last until she could plug in now that she was close enough to her room, and pulled out her phone, holding the button until it flared to life. A quick glance at the time revealed it was barely after 11. Not even 5 full hours had passed. She quickly brought the phone to her face to open it, hit Hazel's number, and listened to the ringing as she walked through the dim lobby toward her room. "Hi, how was your fancy pants party and your dashing date?" Hazel's bright voice enveloped her. "Oh, Hazy, I'm okay, so don't freak, but we were in a car wreck." Violet started to tell Hazel all about it as she approached her room. As she got nearer, she noticed that the door was slightly open. And was that noise inside of her room? She knew she didn't leave the door open. She always checked that. Her heart was pounding now. Too much excitement for one evening. She lowered her voice. "Shoot, Hazy, I think I'm in trouble. I gotta go." It's the end of chapter 1.
Thank you so much, Amy. Although, of course, you're leaving us on a bit of a cliffhanger there. But I think that's fantastic and a great reason for everyone to check out the book, see what happens next. At this time, of course, we do have time for our audience Q&A. So if anyone has a question for one or more of our authors, please go ahead and put those in the chat and I will make sure they get asked. We do have a question to start us off for all three authors. This question is, the relationships between characters are clearly a major plot point driving all of these books. What do you think was the hardest part about developing complex relationships and bringing them to the page? So I'm thinking we could go in reading order. So Stephanie, do you want to start us off with this one?
I think that one of the hardest parts about writing characters is to do it in a way where you're not telling somebody what the character is, but you're letting the character reveal themselves on the page. And especially when you're writing from a single point of view, you have to always learn about other characters through the eyes of your main character. And that can be it can be tricky.
Yeah, it's always that kind of line between showing and telling and how much to trust the reader. And often I think authors can trust readers more than they think they can. So I think it's beautiful to be able to watch the relationships unfold like this. So
And
um
thus editors continue to get paid.
absolutely. Leslie, what about you? What was the hardest part in developing the complex relationships in your book?
I think the most challenging part is understanding that the arc of a character, and you really need to breadcrumb throughout the book as to why the character is doing what they're doing. It's very easy to say, you know, whatever the character, explain what the character is doing, but it needs to have a lead up to that, and it cause and effect. And I think that takes a lot of plotting and planning and foresight. So it has to make sense because we don't think about that in our everyday life, but there's a reason why we behave certain ways, why we do things, why we choose to do things or not do things. And that really needs to be planned out because that affects how they interact with all other characters throughout the book.
Yeah, it's kind of a challenge, I think, to see that from the beginning, but then it kind of unfolds almost when the character takes on a life of their own, and it just sort of comes together in a way that even if it's unpredictable from the beginning, it makes sense when you've really got something that works well. Amy, what about you? What was the hardest part about developing these relationships in your book?
I think by the time you start to write, you've kind of thought about the character for a really long time and you've started to know who that character might be as a person. And then for me, it was tricky to not jump into too much right away, right? Is to wait to sprinkle it, to Leslie's point, into that and weave it into the story. And I think it was tricky in the beginning because my book is more of a romantic suspense and it gets very suspenseful very quickly, which again, echoing it's good for editors to have jobs because that was one of the major feedback pieces I was giving in the first round of edits is to not be quite as rambly or long-winded in the first part of the book, in the first chapter. In that some of the relationships that Violet has in that first chapter, Ambassador Neil, Brandon, there's a lot happening, Hazel, and your brain, you kind of have to wonder like which of these relationships comes back later in the book, which of these is valuable, which of these I might not see again. And so kind of trying to weave enough in to create some mystery was my goal.
Yeah, the plotting and planning of it all, I think, is always so fascinating to hear authors talk about. So, I'm certainly not surprised to hear how much of a role that played as you were developing all of that. We have a question. This is specifically for Leslie. I noticed from your bio that you're an interior designer, much like your protagonist. Did you always want to write a novel that drew from your own work experiences? And what was that process like?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I think early on in my career, I was just naturally observant as to what was going on, and there were some other influences of media, books, and film. Devil Wears Prada was definitely influential in my thinking of like, oh, there's a behind the scenes peek as to a world that people are curious about. That from the outside it looks very sexy and glamorous and exciting, and I was like, it is not that. So I was. I just thought to myself, if people only knew what was really going on behind the scenes, they would really not believe it. So that was kind of always in my mind, and I think there were just certain things that always were I was just remembering them as the years went on, and I knew it was something that I wanted to tell, that I had a story to tell, and with the help of many people, I learned how to dial up the volume and make the characters larger than life and much more dramatic and extreme and exciting and wacky so that it became a little more dynamic and dramatic to read.
Yeah, I can only imagine the level of glamour that it gets to. So I'm sure there's a lot more exciting details to uncover in the book. Another reason for everyone to pick it up. This next question is for Stephanie. There was such a quiet sorrow and pain in that first reading you did today. Were your characters or plot points based in any way on real things you experienced, or how did you get yourself in a headspace to do that writing?
Um, no, I mean, I have experienced deep grief in my life, but not like what Lily was having to go through. This story began. The seed of this story began from another book that I read back in 2016, and it was this that story ended. I thought it was going in one direction and ended up going in a different direction, which was great for that book. But this idea of where I thought it was going stuck with me. And then over the years, the story grew. And originally it was a mother left with a young child, and then it ended up a grandmother. It's hard to say how these things happen because, there's a lot of people living inside my head. And, sometimes they tell you things that you don't want to hear. And sometimes they say very, very smart things. It's like, that's so clever. But so, no, I mean, having experienced grief, which I think we all have, but profound grief like that, where you have to remember how to breathe. That part of it is from personal experience.
Yeah, I totally, I understand that it doesn't have to be the same exact experience to really tap into that. And I think we could really feel that emotion come through in a really authentic way during that reading.
Thank you.
This next question is for Amy. How do you write something fast-paced without losing out on important details?
I don't know. I don't know if I've done that successfully because this is my first novel, so you'll have to read it and tell me. I had a couple of beta readers, and one said, "Give me more detail," and one said, "You don't need as much detail." And so that was really hard to kind of balance. And so I decided to just write what felt right. And I sat down and I just continued to write. And then I edited out when it got a little too rambly. One of the editors at Atmosphere Press did mention, like, I think, get to the action faster and only consider details that might become important later. And so that helped me kind of cull what was just superfluous at that point, or was just kind of me getting to know the characters myself. And so that was helpful advice. And then just rereading it and looking at it a couple of times, you reread your work so much so that by the time it releases, so today's my release date, I feel like I wrote this book 20 years ago. I've read it so many times. And I would already write it perhaps a little differently today than I would have then. So.
Yeah, it always comes back to outside eyes, even when the opinions are maybe in direct conflict with each other, like in this case. But yeah, it's always so helpful just to hear that input. This next question, this is for all three authors. What are you planning on writing next, if anything? Leslie, do you want to start us off with this one?
Sure. Well, my first order of business is I'd like to adapt this to a screenplay and try and have it made into some sort of film media of some sort, because I do think that there's a lot of visual qualities to this that would translate very well to media and visually. So I think that's my first order of business. And then I'm probably around halfway through a first draft, maybe three quarters of my second book, which I have to gain some courage to issue again. But it's a story of a couple in their 30s and a couple in their 60s, both in the hospital. The younger woman is dying and the older gentleman is dying, and it's a deep relationship that forms between a 60 something year old woman and a 30 something year old man in this hospital, and dealing with grief and certain death and emotions of unexpected feelings of love. And it's just kind of the exploration of can love and deep connection cultivate in that kind of vulnerable setting, and can it develop where it transcends time and age. Does age really matter, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think cross genre and even in the same or not genre medium, but also in the same medium, a new book. I think both of those sound like really compelling ideas. So we're all excited, I'm sure, to see what develops with that. Amy, what about you? What is next for you as a writer?
Well, I am on book 4. So I started writing in May, and I've been wanting to do this for a really, really long time, and made a decision to really dramatically change my life in late April of this year. I had a very stressful job and was traveling both nationally and internationally about every 3 weeks away from my family, and kind of woke up and realized that I was really on a hamster wheel of production for other people, and had never really built anything beautiful for myself, and had always wanted to be a writer. And I realized the more stressed I got, the more I was reading. And I was reading about a book a day. I mean, I was reading a romance book every night before I went to bed, not sleeping well. And I thought, some of these, I can maybe write this. I could try this. And so this is book 1. What I've done is I've written a series where each book has a happily ever after. And then the next book is kind of related. So the next book is Hazel's book, which is the sister. So as the book continues, you heard me mention Hazel. Hazel is Violet's sister. So her book is next. And then there's another book written, and then I'm writing book 4 now, and I've got about 18,000 words on that. And each book has either a starting scene or a pivotal moment in a national park or a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And so book 2 has a pivotal scene in the Dry Tortugas at Fort Jefferson. Book 3 has that scene on the mall in DC. And then book 4 opens on the coast of Lyon-sur-Mer, kind of in that Normandy region. So I'm just having so much fun. I'm just going to keep writing, and I would love to keep publishing them, just, as I can.
That sounds fantastic. The series is really unfolding, so that's a great thing to keep an eye out for. And Stephanie, what about you? What are you planning to write next, if anything?
Well, even though this was the first book that I've tried to publish, it's actually the fourth one that I've written. And I realized there was a theme that just kind of came out in all these books about people, women basically, discovering that they are capable of far more than they ever thought that they were. So I'm going to tear apart my third novel, the one I wrote right before this one, because it needs some work, and write it again, and it will dovetail really nicely with this one. It's not about grief at all, but it's about a shy woman finding her moxie. So we'll see how that one goes.
Yeah, I think that's a really great thing. All the time, I always want to see that. So, I'm so excited to hear about these projects from all three of you and to be able to look forward to the next thing as well. But for now, I want to say thank you so much to all three of you for bringing these books to us tonight and for reading them and bringing your thoughts in this Q&A. So thank you officially to Stephanie, Leslie, and Amy for being generous with your time, your words, your thoughts today. And thank you, of course, to everyone in the audience for being here with us to celebrate these authors together as well. The chat has been just so lovely to see. So it's just so wonderful to see the support. Don't forget, of course, that you can order 1,000 Tiny Stitches, Renovation, and In Every Lifetime. I'll put the links in the chat for everybody one more time there. And please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, or submit a book manuscript of your own. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and let us know that you attended today's event. We'll look forward to hearing from you, but until then, that's it for tonight. So have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you, Hayla. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.